Welcome back. Now we're going to be taking a look at our earlier conversation about back-to-school shopping and debt. As the new school year rapidly approaches, NerdWallet's second annual back-to-school survey indicates that nearly 1 in 5 of Canadian parents will likely go into debt this year in order to pay for back-to-school shopping. This year, the average amount that parents doing any back-to-school shopping plan to spend is $743. 23% of those parents plan to purchase fewer back-to-school supplies for their children this year due to inflation. Joining us now to discuss the findings is Shannon, Terrell, financial expert and spokesperson at NerdWallet Canada. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, approximately how much have the prices of typical back-to-school supplies gone up since last year?
So I can't speak to the average price growth of school supplies, but what we do know is that average spend for Canadian parents is up. So we mentioned the $743 on average for back to school shopping this year, but that is more than $200 more than our findings from last year, where Canadian parents said they only expected to spend $524. So as far as those numbers are concerned, we are looking at a sizable jump in budget year over year.
Now, inflation has been a problem for more than a few years. Are we seeing this impact on parents and back-to-school shopping getting any worse every year?
Yes, so inflation has been showing some signs of easing, but it is still a mixed bag. We have been consistently cruising below that 3% threshold that the Bank of Canada prefers to see. But we can't forget that price growth has slowed, though prices have not, for the most part, gone down. So prices are continuing to rise for Canadians. They're just rising at a slower pace. And ultimately, this is going to have a cumulative effect on those back to school budgets.
Now, in terms of debt, do we have any idea just how much debt parents are taking on for back to school shopping?
So while our survey didn't dive into precisely how much debt parents expect to take on, our annual consumer credit report found that on average, Canadians, 55% are carrying credit card debt. And Equifax recently released some information suggesting the average Canadian credit card balance hit an all-time high in 2023 of over $4,100. So, I think the increased spending, the reliance on credit cards, the buying fewer school supplies, and taking on debt, all of these are major indicators that speak to these broader inflationary and cost of living pressures on Canadians.
Now, I do want to touch on parents cutting back on buying school supplies for kids. What are parents specifically cutting back on?
So typically, I think what we're going to see is the parents may be cutting back on the non-essential or the luxury items. This might include things like name brand clothing or the latest tech gadgets. We might see people opting for more refurbished electronics, more generic brands. And then, of course, we might be foregoing some of those trendy non-essentials. So, for example, the Stanley Cups have been quite popular this year. Those retail for almost $50 a piece. So we might be looking for perhaps some knockoffs or some dupes to help save a little bit of money this year.
Now, I'm curious, do you think children are going to put a bit more pressure on parents when they're not willing to buy those name brand things and just buy the dupes?
I think it's possible, but I also think that this is a great opportunity to sit down and involve your children in this conversation. It's an excellent opportunity to build financial literacy, and it's something that we may even be able to talk about in terms of setting a budget for discretionary and non-discretionary spending. And above and beyond those needs, perhaps the wants of the kids this year, maybe that's something that they're responsible for covering a little of on their own. And there's lots of ways for kids to earn a little bit of extra cash. So whatever that looks like for you and your family, don't be afraid to involve your kids in the conversation.
And for the survey, just how many parents were polled to get this data?
So this NerdWallet Canada survey was conducted online by the Harris Poll among 1,014 Canadian adults in July of this year.
Shannon, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.